One window that's been in Visual Studio for a long time and actually dates back to the Windows Forms 2.0 days is the Data Sources window, but it carries over and works wonderfully with WPF and other XAML technologies as well. Basically, this Data Sources window lets you point to different object types, and it will provide the information about those object types so you can use it to hook up data binding. You can drag and drop those entities or the individual properties of an entity onto the XAML designer. And what will happen is if you drop in an open area on the designer, it's going to generate new UI elements and hook up the appropriate properties on those elements with bindings based on what you dragged and dropped. In addition, it's going to generate a collection view source in a resource section for the entity type that was dropped and hook that up as the data source for the new bound UI elements that were generated. At design time, this gives the designer enough information to be able to generate the right controls and hook up the bindings to the properties, but at runtime, you'll just need to write the code that will populate those collection view sources so that at runtime they have real data. In addition to generating brand new UI elements by dragging and dropping, you can drag and drop from properties or entities within the data sources window onto existing controls, and that will just hook up bindings to appropriate properties on those controls. The icons in this window represent the kind of control it's going to be generating, and you can see drop-down arrows next to the selected item, the product in this case, that allows you to change what those mappings are. So you can change what control is going to be generated when you do your drag and drop directly through the UI, and you can also go into an options dialog and you can change what set of controls are available when you do the drop-down for a given property type. In addition to the data sources window, there's the properties window, which anyone who's done any UI design in Visual Studio over the years is certainly familiar with. What you may not be familiar with are the data binding features that are within the properties window. So first off, next to each property, there's a little tiny square there that's kind of subtle what it is, but if you click on that, it'll bring up a context menu. And in that context menu, there's an option to create a data binding. If you click on that, you get a dialog that lets you basically set everything you need to set at a property level for data binding. So if you take the aggregate of all the fine-grained properties that we covered in various modules earlier in the course, things like what are the different kinds of data sources a binding can have, data context, source, relative source, element name, and so on. Then based on which of those you pick, on the right you can set the path to a property on the source object. Down at the bottom you can see you can set up a converter, and the more settings will expand and give you access to all those other fine-grained properties such as update source trigger, is async, mode, and so on. So let's dive into a series of demos that shows us the full power of the data sources window and the properties window in the designer.